Welcome back to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast. I'm your host this week, Adam Stakeman, and in the studio is co-host Christine Floor and also co-host Alex Downard, who is in the hot seat tonight. So I'm not sure, Christine, if this was a suggestion of yours or of a listener, but we are going to kind of do a roundtable series here where one of us will be in the hot seat over the next couple months.
And I drew the short straw and have to go first.
And you get to go first, Alex.
We're going to dig deep.
That's good, though, because then I get to
life.
interview you guys, too. Let's not forget that.
Going to hit him back at us, isn't he?
I didn't think about that.
Me either.
I think I was actually slated to go first, and I passed, and now I'm wishing I hadn't done that.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, in preparation for this, like I do all the episodes, I did a little research, and I
Get ready.
You sold my speeding tickets.
You ran him through my case.
That's right. But I wanted this to be for our listeners. I mean, I know you more on a professional level, but we have spent some time together, personally and in small groups. And Christine, I'm sure you have as well. But I wanted our listeners to have an opportunity to get to know you a little bit about your past, which we've talked about at different times on this podcast, but to really kind of get the deeper dive into like what makes you click and where some of those
Can't wait.
Starting to sweat already.
Don't sweat through your shirt. You'll be fine.
where some of that drive comes from, and now looking back, if there's like this moments of where that actually started at. So in my research, I went back to late high school just to find out. I knew that you had brought it up in a podcast episode, but I couldn't remember where you'd gone to school. But Cardinal Ritter High School down in Indianapolis, is that correct?
Yep.
Two-sport athlete, basketball and football.
Wait, do you have his school photos? Do we need to get his senior photo and insert it into this episode?
They're out there. I saw them.
Absolutely. That is happening.
Okay.
Less embarrassing than I'm sure mine is, but please continue.
Let's see. Captain of the football team, which we'll get into a little bit later on how that brought you to Wabash County. I didn't think I knew that you played basketball. What? It was...
Yeah. So I grew up in Indianapolis, as you said, right? Ritter High School. I originally grew up in the town of Avon on the west side, so in Hendricks County. And then I have one sibling, have a sister, and my dad was a college basketball player, girls high school coach, and then my sister is a basketball coach now, but was an outstanding athlete, much better athlete than I was, and really, really good basketball player, record holder in high school and college. Down she went to Marian University. And so grew up in a basketball family, but grew up around football as well. And my mom worked at Ritter High School. And so my sister and I went to junior high 7 through 12 at Ritter. And when I was in high school, my parents split and my mom and I moved into Marion County. So near Speedway High School, near the Motor Speedway area is where my mom still lives. And then my dad still lives out in Avon on the west side.
Okay. So you excelled at football more so than basketball. Did you enjoy basketball though?
Yeah, absolutely. And enjoy watching basketball now. And I was at a Manchester University basketball game last night, and there was a player on Manchester University's team that I identified with just because maybe not the most basketball talented, sport-specific athlete, but more so just kind of like the hustle guy, taking charges, hopefully trying to be a good teammate, right, to folks was more of my basketball role, I would say, than it was in football.
When you were in high school, did you feel like you had the same drive that I know you have now to put in the extra work before or after practice? Were you excelling in the classroom? Explain to our listeners who you were in high school.
Yeah. No is the short answer to your question. I would say hopefully not. As I think back about myself then, both of my parents instilled work ethic in my sister and I, specifically around sports. I mean, sports has always been a part of our lives. And so very grateful for both my mom and my dad and how they poured into both of us growing up and other mentors that I had. But really for me, I did not gain an appreciation or really for myself start to make changes in my life and grow up until I got to Manchester University and moved away. When it was just my mom and I, that experience when I lived with her kind of forced me to grow up from some of the silly high school decisions I was making at the time. Didn't prioritize school as much as I should, didn't have the appreciation that I do now looking back on education when I was in high school. But really, it wasn't until I got to Manchester University that the offensive coordinator that recruited me out of high school, I originally was just going to go to IU or Ball State, Purdue, go to school, and then decided I wanted to continue playing football. And so started looking at the schools at that point that had reached out, and was really down to Manchester University in Hanover. And one of the main reasons why I chose Manchester was because of this coach that had come to Ritter High School and that I had talked to over time, came up and visited, loved the campus, liked the small town feel of North Manchester and Manchester University. But it was really this coach that I felt early on would pour into me as a student athlete, and still to this day is one of the best mentors and examples I've had in my life. And so I obviously went to Manchester. That's what brought me up here. And then for the next 4 years of my time at Manchester, got to watch him every single day, first one in, last one out. That really was a shift and changed my mindset, not just on football, right, but academics, education, and then the rest of my life. And still some of the things that drive me today were lessons I learned during my time at Manchester University. Not that I still am not learning lessons every single day today. But really that was a huge growth moment for me. I would say those turning points were when I was in high school and when everything happened with my mom and my dad. And then when I moved to Manchester University, where I was forced into situations of growing up, and am grateful, really grateful for that.
You must have had a lot of natural talent then in high school on the football field to not have put in the extra work and yet get recruited at the college level to play. What was that like in high school playing? Ritter's a pretty good sized school, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3A, so small to mid-sized school compared. But yeah, and honestly, it's what held true in high school is the same thing that held true in college as it related to sports. In any room that I was ever in, academically for sure at the time, athletically, was never the most talented, naturally gifted, smartest person in any room I've ever been in. And still, I would say that's the case a lot today in my career too, right? And I'm grateful for that because it forced me, even in high school, but definitely in college, to do the things that I could control, right? If it wasn't the natural ability, that I had no other choice but to put in the extra time to level, what I always said, level the playing field, right? I didn't appreciate in high school, but when I got to college, we started my freshman year at Manchester, we started the season 0-6. And so then had the opportunity the last 4 games of the season to start is those last 4 games of my freshman year. And every year after that, if you think about it, right, it's those coaches' job to recruit competition, right? To recruit the next room of quarterbacks to come in and compete for the role, right? When they're out on the road recruiting, they're saying, hey, we were 2-8 last year, right? It's anybody's job, right? And so me knowing that and then being in a quarterback room at the beginning of camp with 6 to 10 different guys that one person plays on Saturdays, right? The majority of that room could throw a football farther than I could throw a football, or was faster than I was at that time, all the way through college, right? And so that was always, that really kind of developed for me, was a time to mature and grow up and develop and learn those life lessons that go way beyond football. But just that mentality of, in order to level the playing field and be competitive to give myself a shot, I have to do these other things that maybe not everybody has to do.
Yeah. And I think that's, for that football reference, and don't think that I'm comparing you to Peyton Manning, but
Division III Manchester University. Yeah.
But the Peyton Mannings, and I mean, not the most talented quarterback, with an arm or footwork, but that guy's putting in the extra work when it's film time, when it's studying the other players, the defenses, knowing what his strengths are and what the weaknesses are of the other team. There's so many other examples of that, but it's not the natural ability. It's what you're doing when nobody's watching, right?
Hope so. I mean, I hope my teammates, right, from college and even back in high school would say that, right? They're not going to say that, man, I mean, I always say, like, I don't know if I've ever seen anybody on professional television, watching college on television, or watching high school or college games in person that throws a football uglier than I threw the football, right? And so people would probably remember that, but then hopefully they remember exactly what you just said, right?
And that's we're referring to this in the sports context, but that moves on to business and the work that you do when you're in a relationship with other people. It's the other things that you people don't see that really count. And from my perspective and getting to know you over the last few years, you're the guy that's going to do that. Like,
I appreciate that.
So,
and that's what I would credit more than anything. Obviously, I've made a lot of great memories in sports, right? You remember plays or you remember moments, right? And made a lot of great friendships. Some of my best friends today came from sports, but more than anything is truly, hopefully, those values and lessons I try to continue on now that sports taught me, whether it's things like time management, or it's exactly what you were just talking about, right?
So I was curious about Alex, and didn't find a whole lot out of his high school. He was captain of his football team, right? At
In
least
basketball, I think, but
okay. But I knew that he had played at Manchester, and I knew you'd done well. I wanted to see what else you had done while you were at Manchester. So here's just a short list, and I don't want to dwell on these. I just want them to kind of add to this idea that, when you put yourself into that mindset that I'm going to figure out how to make this happen, what can come of this and where it can lead. Who's now you're 28 years old, and you're putting yourself in rooms with politicians that are twice your age or more, making $1 million decisions, now running community foundation. And I was just really, really curious, like how this started and whatnot. So here are just a few. And I know you're getting uncomfortable over there in the hot seat, and that's part of this, is make you as uncomfortable as possible. So student government president. I think you also served as vice president and maybe had even another office at some point at your time at Manchester. Spartan Leadership, Hampshire Honor Society, an NCAA Student Athlete Leadership Forum participant, where you went to Florida. Is that right? Made the Dean's List, HCAC's Sportsmanship Award winner, two-time football captain, and the Warren K. Garner Award recipient. That's quite something to look back on in your time in Manchester. And I know that you've talked, especially on this podcast, about your time in Manchester and how that led you to call this county and this community home. And you had no desire to move on. And after reading that, and I know that those were hard earned, you put the time in to make yourself present for that. But now it kind of helps me understand why this community, or how this community made such an impact on you, because of the awards and the way that it kind of gave itself back to you. I'm sure you poured in and it poured right back.
Hearing you go through that was my next comment, right? I mean, I would say I have a love for Manchester University that I've not felt for it brought me up here, right? Like we've talked about, that spanned well beyond just football or just academics, right? But I truly felt that's where I became who I started building a foundation for who I wanted to be and work towards. Grew up like a lot of people do when they go off to school, right? I'm not saying that's a unique thing or a unique experience, but I truly felt Manchester poured into me in every experience. And so now, and even while I was there, right, it was like pouring back into Manchester. And today, hopefully, still try to do that and get to work closely with Manchester now, thankfully. But
well, and after hearing you talk about your coach who, recruited you, then you came up here, you see him, the first guy in, last guy out, and, you start to follow his lead, which, whether it was sports related or not, I'm assuming that mentality got you into some of these positions. And I think back to my own college days, and I didn't have that single person that poured into me. There were people that tried to pour into me, and I probably put my hands up a little bit and didn't follow. But it makes me think about our kids in this community who have that opportunity, and if they can just have their eyes open enough to watch that somebody that's in their life pouring into them, what an impact it can make. Yeah. Because, you could take Alex version 2.0, who didn't watch that coach, and you could have just gone through college and got a degree and didn't work towards any of these other accomplishments. And who knows where you'd be at, right?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, and then book guys like Joe Messer, right? So Joe was my advisor for the entrepreneurship part of my degree at Manchester, and my political science advisor was fantastic too, Dr. Leonard Williams. But with Joe Messer, I can look back now, and anything from my time since I graduated from Manchester University, internships, career, he's had his fingerprints on, whether it's something as he's a reference call, or it's something as large as like he picked up the phone with me sitting in his office and made an introduction. Perfect example, right? Joe Messer introduced me to Parker Beecham, who introduced me to Keith Gillenwater for my senior year spring internship at Wabash County. Joe Messer picks up the phone when I'm in his office in the middle of the pandemic and stressed out about graduating from college with no job lined up yet, 2 months from graduation, picks up the phone with a construction company he'd worked in the private sector with, gets me my first job right out of college, right? Like I can distinct all the way to the community foundation and him being one of my references for that role, right, which was last March. So another example, right, again, of somebody that's poured into me. And so it said just recognizing those people that poured in, right? I think for that area of my life, I've tried to remember and recognize those folks along the way to pick up. But there's other areas of my life. I mean, until last year, I didn't realize it with my faith, all of the people that God has continued to put in my life that have been pouring into me without me hearing it or having walls up to it, right? But God put those two people in my life that I talked about at Manchester too, right? But I didn't recognize or appreciate any of that. And so I think, to your point, those people I know in this community, but for everyone, right? There's people in their lives that there's the opportunity that they're wanting to pour into you and taking the time to recognize that.
Yeah. And sometimes that's a parent, sometimes it's a sibling, it could grandparent, and sometimes it's a complete stranger. It's a coach who comes to your campus and recruits you. We as individuals have to be open to that. And sometimes we don't even see it, like you said, when it's happening. We see it 10 years down the road.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
What I see from you is you're doing the same thing to the youth in this community. Whether that's Connor, who's now running the Imagine 185 program, or you showing up and passing out tennis shoes to the fifth graders in our community.
4 through 8.
4 through 8. That's you. And those kids may not recognize it yet, but they will someday, And so I just want to say thank you for that.
Thanks. I appreciate all your research there and prep, but you always prep the best before episodes.
He's like
Man,
a
you dug
CIA
deep.
agent.
I have more.
He's
what
probably wrote
goes
your name
around.
at the top. Do you think he's written Alex at the top of his paper?
Yes, I did.
You did, so you remember
Yes, I
who it
did.
is.
Hopefully I don't have to build a resume for a long time, but if I do, I know exactly where to call.
Or just re-listen to this episode.
I was going to say, as I was preparing this, I was like, how does this guy do even a 2-page resume? Forget about like a 1-page.
And be
right?
so humble about
Oh,
it.
for sure.
Alex, there's a lot of drive, there's a lot of grit, there's a lot of self-determination. It's wonderful that you're grateful for all of the pieces and the people who've come along the way. I think the biggest beauty that you feel called to do, and I think we all should, is to return those gifts in a different way, in a different form, and meet other people where they are, because that's what it sounds like to me, is so many met you where you were, and then you chose to receive it. And now at this place and in your career, especially now in your current career, which I know we're going to talk about, you're able now to reciprocate that on a larger scale professionally, but continuing to reciprocate that personally too. And I agree. Thank you for doing that. I've seen the benefits of your influence in other young people, like, Connor recently graduated from Manchester University. We did an episode. I think you guys interviewed him at one point. Mm-hmm. The fellows that we host, the college interns that we host in our community, and young people, old people, me, you just have really chosen to pour that back out. And I'm grateful for that too.
Yeah. And I started with this. I don't want this to be a fluff piece that our listeners are like, oh, you guys are just here to build him up and talk about all the things
fact check us then. Go Google his name.
But I really want people to understand that, like, as a young kid, like, something changed in you, and it was an outside impact, and how we all as a community, whether it's somebody that we go to church with that is a friend of one of our own kids. Like, I have a 18-year-old son and some of his friends that I know, whether they realize it or not, that I'm having an impact on. Mm-hmm. And I'm aware of that every time I'm around them, right? When I'm leading by example, mm-hmm. or, whatever. We all have that opportunity, as our listeners do and we do in this room, to make a difference in this community. And that's the point of what we're doing here. So you graduate from Manchester University in 2020 during the pandemic. And like you said, you'd gotten that opportunity for that internship through Wabash County. And then our community at the same time is going through this idea of creating a plan for the community. How do we grow and stop the population decline? What do we need to do? And you had the opportunity to be involved in that. Talk a little bit about that. I know we've talked about it on the program a little bit. Just talk a little bit about what that did for you, not so much the work that we did for the community, but what it did for you. How did it change your vision for what was possible and the impact you could make?
Yeah. Part of that story that some folks may not know, when I was an intern here my senior year of college, one of the first things that was on my task list as an intern, right, was to help build a proposal to hire a consultant to write that strategic plan, right? And so I remember talking with Keith Gillenwater at the time, who was at Wabash County, right, and Tennille, who's here now, and thinking that it was a busy intern assignment that I was given, right? Because my remembrance from when I grew up of strategic plans was you did them and then they sit on a shelf, right? And so that kind of like touchy-feely process of engagement, what are your ideas, like this broad stakeholder fluff, right? Maybe to take one of your words, that was how I felt about it, right? And I remember then Keith said that this isn't that, right? Like Wabash County has to be committed to doing something with this, right? Once the process is done in order to reverse population decline, because that's what it was all around, right? And so fast forward, they kicked off that process, right? My internship's over and I'm just a resident, have no employment. No, I'm not on a board. I'm not on a committee of anything. I'm just attending these stakeholder groups, right? As a young resident that's living in Wabash County, providing input virtually, in person, all of the stick the dots, sticky note stuff, right? And so then fast forward and the plan was adopted, right? The process had concluded, COVID was in there. And I remember sitting with Keith and I were catching up and he said, oh, we finished the Imagine 185 plan. I said, oh, what are you going to do for implementation, right? Remember when you told me like that, the hard work starts now, right? It's not the 2 years, which is a painstaking process, can be a painstaking process. And he said, well, we're trying to hire an implementation director. And I said, oh, that's great. He said, will you help me write a position description? I said, yeah, I'm happy to do that, right? So I take it back. I get halfway through a position description and I was on Google, right? Like implementation director for a countywide comprehensive plan, right? And trying to pick and build. And I got halfway through it and I was like, gosh, I want to do this, right? I want to do this work. And at the time, my first few years of my career, I was working in business development for commercial construction and then started commercial real estate sister company there. And then at one point after almost 2 years being there, started my own kind of one-person consulting business where I was still working with them and had other multiple clients, did some work in the state house around education, workforce. And then when this opportunity came, I was like, man, I feel like I'm being pulled and pushed at the time, didn't realize that God was pushing me there. But so I went back to Keith and I said, hey, I want to do this work. So I met with him and Patty Grant from the Community Foundation and said, I want to do this work. What does this look like? And so at that point, I kind of stopped all my work down in Indianapolis and started as the implementation director kind of through that, my one-person consulting business in October of 2022 was when that kind of came to fruition. And so worked directly with Keith and Patty, the county commissioners, and then a representative from all 5 of the communities is still today that advisory board that oversees the Imagine 185 implementation work. And so that process for me solidified Wabash County being home, right? Not attending the workshops, right? That was cool, right? To be a part of that and didn't have that experiences in my community growing up in Indianapolis, right? But so that was exciting to be a part of that. At Manchester, getting involved in different things in the community, I was excited to feel that kind of small town. I think that's one of the things what I appreciated about it, right? But through that Imagine 185 implementation work, it really solidified, I want my kids to grow up here someday. And really got a taste of, I could go to Indianapolis, Chicago, like we've talked before, work my tail off and maybe never have the opportunity to be in a conversation about a project of this magnitude or of this scale proportionally in those places. But the opportunity to do that and then see things start to come to fruition from those relationships, from those conversations, from those projects or initiatives was like, man, that's my seeing this stuff actually move forward and having that impact is my high, for lack of a better term, right? Like, that's really cool. I want my kids to grow up in a place of opportunity like this, right? And if I'm going to dedicate pouring into this place, which I didn't know at the time how long I would be doing that work, right? But I enjoyed it and was like, man, how does every rural community have opportunities like this, but specifically the one that I'm living in, right?
And to this point, I would say that the work that you did, and not just you, but the entire community, it's been successful and it's already paying dividends. Some of those that we won't even see for another 10 years, right? But things like bringing new ideas, like bringing college students into this community and immersing them almost like you had that opportunity when you were at Manchester. But if they go to IU, they go to Purdue, they go Rose-Hulman, those students are coming in and getting that same love and attention from business owners, individuals, members at the YMCA. They're getting that same attention, and like, I could see myself here. And then they get to see and talk with people like yourself who live it and have lived it. And so thank you for that.
Oh, I appreciate it. And to be 100% clear, right? Like that is a result of people that are paid to do the work, right? So what I'll call our community support organizations, right? Our local government leaders, the private sector business leaders, right? In our community that we're very fortunate to have, but everyday residents. And that's not a cliche thing to say. I know I've worked with other communities in similar work, and I've lived in other communities, and people think it's a little tongue in cheek, but one of our major competitive edges is our human capital and the people that are here. That's what I see the most potential in, and where I see Wabash County going is because of that, right? The people that we have here. But it is 100% a team effort, and that ball, that snowball rolling, that momentum going, because it's hard stuff. It is hard work. It takes time. It takes everybody, right? All different partners, all different people. We've all been in conversations about different things, right? To take something from a concept to then bring it all the way to fruition, it can't just be one person or one organization that makes any of that happen.
Collaboration. And then the other thing that we have is that nobody says, my name needs to be at the top for recognition, right? That none of us have ever experienced that. It doesn't matter if it's between Manchester and Wabash and there's a community project that we're both going to work towards to get money into this community. Nobody says my name needs to be at the top. Just it never happens. So how long are you at Imagine 185 in that implementation role?
Plus or minus 3 years, 2.5, 3 years.
And then through that process, you have met people all over our community and even Northeast Indiana. But one of those people that I know had a big impact on you was Patty Grant. Mm-hmm. And you did an interview with Patty for this podcast. That was episode 8 of season 1. And since your time at Imagine 185, Patty decides that she's going to retire. And you apply for that position, and you get to now call yourself the president and CEO of Community Foundation. Is that right?
Yeah, the way that you described that process, man, it was like quick. And just remember those months in that process didn't feel so quick.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a quick turnaround. But I remember in mid-November, Patty called and said that she was retiring. I remember as soon as I hung up the phone, and it's bad that my brain works this way, right? But worked closely with the Community Foundation, realized, and still obviously realize the value and all of the different things that the Community Foundation does in the community today, but also the potential for that organization, right? When Patty was there. And so as soon as she hung up the phone with me, I wrote down a list of names of local people that would make really good candidates to take that job. And
because you recognized the degree of importance in which that role is, and the impact, right? That's why you did that, not for control, not for any selfish reasons. It was 100%. You saw the impact and the value and how critical role Community Foundation is, and so you're instantly like, we have to have the right person in that position.
And as bad as this. So I caught myself from that moment picking up the phone and starting to call some of these people, and at least waited till the next day, right? I didn't feel right for Patty that my brain was working that way. So I, the next day, did that though, right? And picked up the phone and then talked to the search committee chair and the board chair and said, okay, these are the people that are on my list. I think I've not talked to these people. I have talked to these people. This is where I think they are, right? And
you had an advantage because you were so deep-rooted in all of the communities by helping implement the Imagine 185 plan and all of those 85 initiatives in every corner. You also had a unique perspective on the way professionals, individuals, and volunteers contributed and served either in their capacity or in a volunteer role. So it did give you kind of advantage of then understanding what the skill sets and needs were to attempt to follow Patty Grant in that role at the Community Foundation. So that is also a unique perspective for you too that came out of that role as the director for Imagine 185.
One thing I'm grateful for when I first got out of Manchester University was in this business development role. Somebody taught me and gave me the advice that leave every meeting with 3 more names to go meet with, right? And was in a role that was external sales, right? Business development role. And so across Northeast Indiana was in a spot where I was what I call smiling and dialing, even if it wasn't over the phone, LinkedIn, whatever platform it was. Hey, I'm right out of school. Can I just pick your brain, right? I'm not calling you to say, like, I'm not going to convince you to trust me with a multi-million-dollar construction project. That's not why I'm calling you, right? I'm calling you to see if I can pick your brain a little bit, find out who I should be talking to, what advice you have for somebody that's in my shoes. So I got to spend 18 months doing that right out of college, left every one of those meetings with 3 more people to go talk to that do the exact same thing with. And so that gave me a foundation to when I started the Imagine 185 work, and by being a resident, had some relationships, or through my intern days, had some relationships in this community. But I don't have kids in the school at that point, right? I'd rented a couple places. I wasn't in a neighborhood that I had these strong connections. So when I got here, I was thankful for the experience I had before, and knowing that if we were going to accomplish anything, if I was going to accomplish anything in that role, I had to have relationship equity with folks, right? And in rural communities, anywhere, but definitely in rural communities, disingenuine relationships, everybody sees right through that, right? And so when I started the Imagine 185 work, it was the same thing, right? Like, advice, what would you do if you were in my shoes leading this work? Who are 3 more people I should talk to, right? And so that work allowed me, then we are in the trenches on a project together, right? And building that relationship equity with our leaders in our community to what that was the driving factor behind when I know this rolls up. It's like, it's time to sit in the room with those folks and say, this is so important to our community, right? And so the conclusion of that kind of next few months was, I got close to, I was a week and a half away from when they had the deadline to apply for the position, and had a meeting with a mentor in Fort Wayne, a meeting with a mentor in North Manchester, and one in Wabash, 3 consecutive days, completely independent of each other. And each one of those meetings, the person said, why aren't you thinking about applying for this role? What's next for your career? What do you want to do? And you're silly for not thinking about this with the Community Foundation role. So at that point, I started thinking about it. I said, okay, I'm getting that message, right, and that sign. And that was one of the most transformational moments for me in my life and my faith. And not because, so I end up submitting, right? So I turned that around. But every time, every step of the way, it was, God, I'm not asking for this role. I'm not asking for you to put me in this position. All that I'm saying and all that I'm asking is that if you want me in this role, I'll be there. Right. And it'll the next step will transpire. Every conversation I went into, whether it was a one-on-one meeting, an interview, or the final interview, I remember the final interview was at Manchester University in person. And I remember in the bathroom, I think I was the last person to go. And I just remember sitting in front of the mirror where I went to school at a place that was so monumental in my story, or still is, and just saying, like, this is it, right? Like, if you want me here, then I'll be there. I was 27 years old at the time. Was not the safe candidate to hire a 27-year-old to lead a $100 million community foundation. Much more talented candidates. And so I knew that if I was going to be in those shoes, it was absolutely had nothing to do with me, right? And so when I had accepted that was the first time for something in my life that I just completely surrendered it over to my faith and to God. And like, that was the most, and then it came true, right? So to your earlier point, stewardship is the word every single day that I try to keep at the forefront, right? Obviously, the word stewardship's easy in the community foundation world, right? So not only with our organization, not within the community, but truly like feeling like I'm in a position that my everyday purpose is to steward while I'm in the seat, right? To steward whatever it is, whatever project, whatever resource, that's what we're called to do. That's what I'm called to do. And our team, my entire team, right, all of us in leadership roles in this community, because of the people that came before us, that poured into us, or that poured into this place with no name recognition. And that's Patty, a mentor, right? To your point, one of the things I respect the most about Patty, and I said this at her retirement, and it's probably incorrect because of all the great work she's done, but there will be kids 20 years from now that get to benefit, 30 years from now that benefit from Patty's work in this community, and we'll never know who Patty Grain is. And a lot of them probably will, right, because of all the great work that she's done. But that's what we're called to do, right? It's like, and that's how to remind ourselves it has nothing to do with who's at the top of the list for the credit or any of those things, right? It's all of the people that led in this community before us. It was never about that. And so the foundation that we have to build on to take to the next level, it is truly stewarding it forward while we're in that seat, right? To create more opportunities for kids in our future.
I would say for a young professional, maybe not even young professional, maybe somebody that's just changing their careers, go back 3, 4, 5 minutes and re-listen to what Alex just said about going into a room and coming out with 3 new people that you want to communicate with. And it's got to be very genuine, right?
100%.
Be humble, be genuine. That's such an amazing nugget.
And take the advice.
Absolutely.
Right?
And thank them. I mean, you just spit out so many amazing gold nuggets for our listeners if they want to go back and listen to that again. As I mentioned earlier, was it season 1, episode 8 with Patty Grant? Amazing episode that you did with Patty. Had she fully retired at that point, or you guys were kind of
during that episode?
Yeah.
No, she'd retired at that point.
She had retired.
Yeah.
Great episode that talks a lot about our education system here and how all that funding started. So if you're curious about that and you haven't listened to that episode, go back, find that episode and listen to it. Amazing information. But, in preparing for this episode with you again, Christine and I were talking about the number of people in our community that maybe don't know what a community foundation really does. Without going into one specific area too deep, tell us a little bit about all the things that the community foundation does and what maybe even things that you didn't realize were involved in that role.
I'll try to keep it high level. And then if you have specific questions, we can dive into them. Community foundations everywhere now in Indiana, which I'll get to kind of that background as well. But there's some core things that each community foundation does, but then they all have unique things that they do too, right? And so I'll circle back to that. In Wabash County, our community foundation started out of North Manchester as the North Manchester Foundation. I'm probably messing up that name, but 1954. One of the first community foundations in the state of Indiana, where now today all 92 counties are represented by a community foundation. Some are 1 or 2 counties potentially in a region, but the majority of our counties have their own community foundation, in large part due to the Lilly Endowment. Over the last 15, 20 years, the Lilly Endowment has really, any dollars outside of the Indianapolis metro area that they push across the state, 9 times out of 10 is through community foundations traditionally and typically. So they're a huge credit to the state of where community foundations stand today, and asset size of those community foundations and everything else have given such strong support and foundation for that. But in Wabash County specifically, we just completed our strategic plan as an organization. And it isn't new, shiny, brand new things, right? But it's maybe just reframing or how we talk about the work that we do, right? And I was a little bit embarrassed that when we were starting this strategic planning process, here I am in the role, right? And newer in the role. And it was like, okay, what's our mission? And I was sitting there like, I can't say out loud what our mission statement is. And here I am, just a new executive at the community foundation. So I asked the other folks in the office, it's like, what's our mission statement? Like, we can all talk about the work that we do, obviously, every day at the community foundation, but like truly somebody asked us, what's our mission? None of us could say it. So I felt a little bit better about myself. And then I got on our website and it was like a page and a half long. And it was like, okay, that's why I don't know our mission. Vision, a page long. That's why I don't know our vision, right? So a key part of how we talk about what we do is truly centered around this now, right? Our mission is that we create lasting impact through asset development, nonprofit capacity building, and community leadership.
Will you say it one more time and kind of break it down a little bit more?
That's where so when I say our mission at the Community Foundation is to create lasting impact through 3 buckets of work,
Okay.
right? And that's asset development, nonprofit capacity building, and community leadership.
Okay.
Our asset development bucket, Melissa Ford-Kalpfeld from our team is our development director, and so leads that. We manage 450 unique funds. 350 of those are endowments. The other 100 are what we call non-permanent funds. Those 450 funds each have their own unique purpose and were established with the donor, right? And so all of our asset development work is truly carrying out the charitable interests of members of our community while they're living, or potentially testamentary gifts, meaning that we work with them while they're living so that once they've passed, we carry out their charitable interests, right?
And
Community.
give our listeners a couple ideas of what those could be. Give ideas.
Yep. So we could have a testamentary donor that when they pass, they make a gift to the community foundation. That doesn't mean it's coming to support the community foundation's operations. 98% of the time, that's not the case. What community foundations are positioned to do is work with that donor while they're living and say, what are those charitable things that you've had a passion for that you want to leave your assets to, right? Or whatever size the gift is. We have donors that say, I love the animal shelter. The animal shelter is my jam. They leave the money to the community foundation. We establish what's called a fund agreement with that donor that spells out exactly what that purpose is. And then it's invested by us, managed by us, and under our what we call spending policy, which essentially just sets how much of that fund that's established once that donor passes, the gift comes, it establishes that endowment that we set out with them, how much of each year is spendable to send to the animal shelter, right? We get asked a lot, why would I not just give directly to the nonprofit, right? One, not all small nonprofits in the community are set up to take testamentary gifts. But the second piece is it's invested with our portfolio at the Community Foundation now of $120 million in total assets. And so what that allows us to do, we just looked at the year-end report in 2025, and we have, of the 350 endowments, all but less than 10 of those funds have grown more than 10% over the original contributed amount. That doesn't even take into account the money that's granted out annually from that. That's roughly 4% of the value, right? That's spendable or could go out to that nonprofit. And so that's why a community foundation is just so uniquely positioned to work with these donors to then take this to ensure that that nonprofit organization is never going to be able to spend that all the way out, right? It'll truly be around forever to support that cause that the donor wanted to make sure to benefit that organization for generations to come. Right. And so that's a little bit of a unique side, but that's our asset development bucket, right? Is truly working with donors with those unique funds to carry out charitable interest in the county.
And so you give the example of the animal shelter. I'm assuming that Daniel's Place kind of falls into that same, if somebody wanted to give money. What about scholarships? Does that fall under that same bucket?
Yep, absolutely. And it's truly as long as it's charitable, deemed charitable by the IRS, right? We can work with those donors to set up any number of things. A scholarship to go to benefit a trade student or a student that's going into the trades, right? It could be a donor that wants to support the Imagine Early program that we'll get to in a second. But the Imagine Early program, we talked a lot about in Patty's episode, but they could specifically want to support a dual enrollment incentive as a part of the Imagine Early program, right? And so they'll make a gift to do that. And in their specific fund agreement, we'll spell that out, right? If it's not an endowment, we have what's called non-permanent funds, which a lot of our nonprofit agencies have in the county. And I'll make a reference to it. It's a lot like a checking account, right? That a nonprofit could have a non-permanent fund with the community foundation, and they can make grant requests out of that fund if they're the advisor or the beneficiary of that fund. Donors can make gifts to that fund through the community foundation. We have a lot of donors every year that all of their charitable gifts come through the community foundation. And we're issuing the tax receipt. That doesn't mean that money is going to benefit us, right? It's to whatever charitable interest that those donors want. And so in 2025, it was our record year. We brought in $11.5 million in new gifts to the community foundation and around another $1.5 million in what's called interfund transfers. So if we have a donor advised fund that we manage for a donor, they make a gift out of that fund to another fund or another organization. That's an interfund. So just over $13 million total in gifts that are going out, right? Over time that are going to go out. We grant out we did $7.5 million, which was a record for us last year in terms of money granted out as well.
Wow. And so of those kind of three buckets that you talk about, that's the bucket number one. So what's bucket number two that you guys are working on?
Yeah, Sam McFadden, who is the director of nonprofit capacity building, oversees our nonprofit capacity building bucket of work. And traditionally, when people think about community foundations, they think about grants, right? And that's been the case for us, right?
Grants and endowments. I mean, I think that was kind of, other than I was a little bit aware of what Patty had done with education and the Learn More Center, and I don't want to steal you, but truly at the heart of it, I always thought, oh, you need a grant, just right. The community foundation's going to look, when's their grant cycle start, and it's wonderful to have you explain this more and deeper.
And I won't go as much into the weeds maybe as we did on that, unless we want to, but the nonprofit capacity building bucket grant making is one of that three-legged stool under that umbrella, right, of our nonprofit capacity building umbrella. So that will always be a part of who we are. That and endowments are what are common across community foundations in the state of Indiana, right? I would say more than anything. And so grant making is our first bucket under that, right, to where we have what's called strategic initiatives, which may be more upstream or proactive on our part going to an organization or an organization coming to us with a strategic idea. And then we have what's called responsive grant making, which is through our Good Deeds application, where nonprofits will come and apply for funding through that. What is a little bit newer for us and how we're reshaping how we're talking about these things or formalizing it is that in addition to the grant making under that umbrella, we're also starting education and training for nonprofits. One thing that we've heard from leaders in the community are smaller nonprofits that may feel like they're in a silo, that it's not just money to help solve that problem. It's not just grant making, right? And so what we've launched in 26 and what Sam's overseeing from our team is truly education series throughout the year, virtually, in person. What are the resources that nonprofit leaders, that other nonprofit staff people, volunteers, board members, committee members, what are those topics, governance, marketing, data, board trainings, what are those resources that we can provide to those organizations that us as the community foundation, working with all of them and seeing their needs come through grant applications, what are those other tools that we can give them to be successful? And then the third bucket of our nonprofit capacity building umbrella is what we call shared services. And so that'll be rolled out here in 2026. We were fortunate to really accelerate this portion through the Lilly Endowment's Gift 9 initiative. We received $750,000 that we're using to really stand up our shared service bucket. And that's really all focused on providing those collaborative opportunities, outside the box collaborative opportunities across nonprofit lines so that nonprofits can reduce their operational burdens and ultimately serve more people in the community and do it collaboratively, right? Whether it's confusion about which organization does what, whether it's something as simple as case management, centralizing that and using these resources to help those nonprofits stand up whatever shared services come from them, right? We're going to convene all of them and let what we develop and what we fund truly come from those conversations. So we're excited about that in our nonprofit capacity building bucket this year. And then the last bucket of our work and where the majority of our staff time goes, right? So you have Melissa that leads our development bucket that we all help with, obviously, and support each other. Sam with our nonprofit capacity building umbrella. And then our community leadership umbrella is led by Julie Garber, who's our Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. And truly our main focus for the last 10 years under that bucket has been educational attainment, that we really break down into 3 buckets. And that's early childhood, which we can talk as much about as we want. Our Imagine Early program, which was Wabash County Promise, then Early Award Scholarship. Now from here on out will always be Imagine Early, and our work in adult education with the Learn More Center. And so that educational attainment bucket is something that we've dedicated and will continue to dedicate a lot of resources to. But then also under our community leadership pillar, our work with the Wabash County Development Corporation with housing, right? We supply the staff, grant making, and then investments from our assets into different projects through loans. And then also in our Imagine 185 work, quality of life, quality of place focus. And really in our community leadership bucket, there's a variety of roles that the community foundation that we can play, right, from our team. That could be that it's a program of ours, like Imagine Early, where Joanne Case, who's our director of our Imagine Early program, Judy Orr is our Imagine Early engagement manager, Terry Sprunger, our director of operations, handles the data. That's one of our programs and a flagship initiative of ours. All the way down to the community foundation's role may just be getting all of the organizations that focus on housing or food insecurity in the same room and just playing convener, right? There's a spectrum in our strategic plan that shows the different roles that our community foundation plays to address an issue, right? Could be just convener at the most basic level of engagement all the way to long-term flagship initiative. And truly, I mean, educational attainment for us started down here, right around convening stakeholders to address an issue. And then over time, just has continued to work up. And so we use the phrase of, what does our community need us to do, need us to be, right? And so we've seen things that continue to rise up through the spectrum, educational attainment, housing, and then with my transition to the Community Foundation, the Community Foundation's been a leader and a driver of the Imagine 185 initiative. And just simply for a help of transitioning that, we take more of a leadership role in it now with having Connor as a staff person of ours, holding the Imagine 185 fund that all the partners pay into for the implementation work. And so that all falls under that kind of community leadership bucket of ours. And there's a lot under there, right? But we have an unbelievable team, right? We have our full-time people that I mentioned. We have a contract worker that supports our early childhood work. We have a contract worker in Mackenzie Coulter-Kern that supports the Diversity Coalition's work. And that has been the best thing about the transition to the Community Foundation is I got to work alongside some of our folks, but truly every day. And that's something else Patty taught me, right? Everybody here thinks they work for you, and it's the total opposite, right? Like the opportunity every day to get to work alongside and pour into them and remove barriers and help them run has been one of the best things about the job so far.
I have to remind myself that Alex is 28 years old. And I think to
and that's not to discredit.
Not at all.
That is not to discredit.
No.
Yeah.
Where I was at 8 years post-college or 6 years post-college, and what he's, the support crew that he has around him, the team that you've built there, after, Patty's retirement, the Wabash County's future is in great hands. Wabash County, right, with other leaders like Alex who are pouring into this community.
And not with arrogance.
No.
That's the other thing, too. The Community Foundation has been a solid foundation for our community's growth and direction for years. You didn't come in with arrogance thinking I can do it better. You came in thinking, how do I build on with these wonderful people, hearing what they have to say? And I love that the fact that you just said, Patty said, they don't work for you. Remember, you really, truly, and you believe that in your heart, you work for them, and what can you do for your community? The culture, I was just sharing this with Alex and Melissa. I got to see them the other day. And the culture at the Community Foundation office space, that echoes through. And you were explaining how in awe you are of the people you feel blessed to work alongside in that office. That culture ripples throughout the space. I mean, it's an energy. Their kitchen is located in it's a gathering place, The community's invited often to use their conference room for whatever they would need with all the technology. I mean, you just offer that. Or if someone is in need of additional training, you've heard that outcry and implemented that. So it's neat to see you walk in, and it's exciting. It's neat to see you walk into the role, well earned. And it's thrilling to see where you, with the rest of your team, will take it and keep leveling it up with those foundational pieces that were built before you came. And that made it secure. You didn't come into an organization that was
there was
rocky.
nothing to fix, right? That's
right.
What people say, man.
And that could be scary.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't broken, and so you get to look like the hero.
And say, what do we do? I mean, that's...
The hero retired. One of the heroes retired. The
100%.
Legacy builder.
100%.
Yeah.
No, and we talk about the stewardship side, right? I mean, it feels a lot. I love the job because I get the perfect balance of getting to work like in the business and on the business as a reference, right? I'm in the trenches. We're still doing like the next thing, right? Building something from the ground up. And I really, really enjoy getting to do that. I love that about the Imagine 25 work. I love that about my job now. But I also get the opportunity to look at something like the Imagine Early program that is studied by the University of Michigan for the last 10 years across the country, recognized and say, okay, because of all those things, because of all this momentum that we have, how do we take this and blow the wheels off, right? Blow the roof off and just continue to develop it, refine it, making small things, not changing the spirit of the program or what works, right? But then just doubling down on what works and making it better, right? And that is our team. I mean, and just the stability of the team, the resources. I will just for 1 second tell this story. So the Imagine Early program, 10 years, we're in our 10th school year. Patty and Julie Garber from our team built this program, right? They were told from the jump from folks around the country, it will not work because it's not government funded. It will not, you will not be able to sustain this program, right? They worked their tail off, right? Developed a program, and in 2022, launch a campaign here locally in Wabash County to raise $4 million, $2 million to go to early childhood and $2 million to support Imagine Early, right? To raise money. In 18 months, this community steps up, recognizes all of that hard work of our team, right? Of internally, them building this program. It's then recognized by our local community. We then have an opportunity this past year. We're approached because of the program that was developed. Somebody came across the research that the University of Michigan did on the impact of Imagine Early, caught an attention of an anonymous donor somewhere that we'll never know. They had an advisor group that they had hired to help them sunset their family foundation. This advisor group reaches out to us via the general inbox on the Imagine Early website. Our team thought it was spam. We finally get a human on the phone, realize it's not. They send us a structured email. We send them all of our audits, 990s, documentation, all this checklist that they request. Hear nothing. They schedule a meeting, a virtual call. We have a 45-minute due diligence call to answer their questions, tell them about Imagine Early. We hear nothing for 2 months and get an email that the anonymous donor left $2 million one-time gift to support Imagine Early.
Oh my gosh.
So then from
yeah.
somewhere else, right, that we'll never know. And so you talk about local buy-in from building it within our team, this community recognizing that, stepping up as always, wrapping around it, somebody from somewhere else that we'll never know who they are that makes this gift. And then we have a fund holder that had an existing fund to support the Imagine Early program whose value's grown to around $3.89 million that sees this, recognizes the changes, things we're doing to just make tweaks and build on the Imaginary program. And they transition their fund to broadly support the Imaginary program that allows us to blow the roof off. And it will truly be around forever because of our spending policy that we have, where we only spend a portion, right? We have been able to endow the Imaginary program to forever have students that will benefit from that, right? Wow. And all of the tweaks that we're making to try and boost enrollment, try and boost collection, we now have the resources that as market continues to grow, right? And our spending policy that will have money there to support that uptake of students and ultimately support more students, create more opportunities, and hopefully those students can earn more money through the program. So if they want to know more about Imaginarily, the Patty episode's great, right? To hear the full backstory. Yep. But I just wanted to share that quick story that just shows like your team, right? Every day you're in the trenches, you get local community buy-in, and then people outside recognize it, and then your people locally recognize it even more, right? And that's been really cool. I mean, at our last board meeting, some of the decisions we made to truly sustain that program and where we're going to house the money within our portfolio, some of those board members were in the room when Patty walked in and said, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know what it's going to be like. And they all said, yes, let's try it and lean in, right? And that's leadership. That is leadership. You don't know what the outcome's going to look like. It's not the easy thing that you sit at your desk all day and say, what have we been doing? And it's not that we're doing anything new every day, right? Know what you're good at, right? Know what the community needs you to do, but be willing when there's a gap to lean in and say, let's try it. A testament to Patty's leadership, a testament to the board members that were in the room then to now be able to sit and see when all those big cities across the country said that will never work if the government doesn't support it, to now see a program that has nothing to do with government funding, sustained forever, is what it's about.
And on that same, you mentioned the work at the Learn More Center and Julie Garber and Cynthia Johnson. They're both going to be on an upcoming episode of yours, season 2, episode 8, I believe it is. And so for somebody that's curious about what that adult education piece looks like, you're going to do a deep dive with those two, which I imagine is going to be phenomenal as well. So thank you for all the work that you've done at the Community Foundation and all the work leading up to that. We are unfortunately getting close to time of wrapping this up. Yeah. And there were so many additional things that I wanted to talk about, including the volunteer hours that you put in, that I know Christine puts in and I put in as well, and how critical those are, and how those come about, and how we have each found our own little areas of interest that we like. And when you're pouring your time, volunteer time, into organizations that you just truly care about, it's not extra work, right? It's just a passion that comes out. So maybe at some point we can do a whole nother, between the three of us, we can do how we each got involved in volunteering our time. It's not money, right? We're pouring our time into organizations like, I know for you, Alex, it's Habitat for Humanity. I think you're still on that board there. There's a whole list. It's part of my research before going into this episode. I did want to save a little bit of time for just kind of a couple rapid fire questions that I know that you like to put your guest under.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Do you have anything, Christine, that you want to do?
I want to make sure I got to pick my favorites here, since we filled the time with such really good, important content. Okay, so when you need to reset, refocus, what do you do? Where can we catch you recentering and refocusing? Because I imagine there are times when you get to a point where you are exhausted. I mean, as high energy as you are, as dedicated as you are, your battery has to wear down at some point. So what do you do to refocus or just re-energize?
Crash when I go to sleep, hit the bed.
Do you?
No. I really, on a daily or weekly basis, I enjoy running. I'm not a Adam. I don't do the crazy triple digit runs. My sweet spot's in the 2 to 10 mile range. That's my sweet spot, depending on time. Yep, good clarity for me. If it's a little bit more on a quarterly basis, I'm not good at like vacations or week-long trips, but I really, really enjoy long weekends. And so it's a Friday afternoon till Sunday night or Monday morning, somewhere else, right, to reset. And I may still be working that somewhere else, right, but it's not in my same routine. And I have a lot of clarity that normally comes from those. I do quarterly small town trips to another small town in Indiana somewhere, and just go be an observer, right, somewhere else. And have gotten a lot of different ideas or clarity about things that we're working on here or new ideas for things. So I've really enjoyed that, and that's always been a good reset for me.
What about you, Adam? What do you have for Alex?
Same. I have to kind of narrow this down. What's a very normal thing that you are weirdly bad at?
Oh, I love your question better.
You should ask my staff that, and they'd be able to tell you now. What's a really normal thing that I'm bad at?
That you're weirdly bad at?
Technology.
Oh,
That's on my list.
True.
Easy, easy. Oh,
but you're willing to learn
Mm-hmm.
out of necessity.
Yep, that's one. Something really normal. I'm not really good at like action sports, like ball sports, like playing with a ball, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, even. I mean, I wasn't a soccer player, but that stuff doesn't. But like, I don't know, like ice skating, I used to enjoy a lot, but I would be terrible at it probably now. Roller skating, never really got into. Snowboarding, no. Skiing, not really my jam. And I'm just not very talented at those things. I feel like a lot of people are, but I am not one of those people.
Know your lane and
That's
stay to
right.
it.
Billiards, ping pong, darts, not worth a darn.
Oh,
Did any of
really?
that, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Cornhole, very average, right? Like depends on the day.
I've played cornhole with you, and I
You never know what you're going to get.
realize that you're probably not my ideal partner. Don't take offense
That's
to that.
not fair.
Do you have any other
Not
questions
as
for
fun
me?
as yours. I think I would ask what excites you most. This is one of my things. That you've seen so much change in your, not only in your role that you've served in Wabash County, but also implementation of some of the planning and the hard work. So what excites you the most for the future of Wabash County? I mean, I'm stoked just hearing about all the wins for the Community Foundation, because at the heart of every win for the Community Foundation of Wabash County is a win for all of us.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
a remarkable win for all of us. And so in celebrating that for you, but what excites you the most for the future of Wabash County?
Yeah. And I'll start by saying the same thing I say all the time, and I hinted at earlier, right? By saying our human capital, the people, the leaders of our organizations, for-profit, nonprofit government right now. And I'll go a step deeper and say what am I most excited about is because I feel very fortunate to have gotten to work with a lot of the leaders in our community. Not all of them, a lot of the leaders in our community across those sectors. And I know and trust their heart. And I don't take that for granted. And so it's not just that, again, the tongue-in-cheek saying, oh, the people here are different, right? But like truly, I feel we've built relationships with these folks, and I trust them and where their heart's at every day. That does not mean that I agree with their approach, their stance on things, that we don't have our own challenges and battles.
Sure.
But I believe in the future of this community and the future of Wabash County, because everyday residents to all of the leaders of our organizations or communities, that I know that their heart is in the right place. And I trust their hearts, and I'll put ours up against anybody else. And every community is going to tell you that, right? But I believe that to my core, and why it pushes me every day is because I know that everybody else across the board, that their heart's working, and that they want the same things for the future of our community, for the future opportunities to keep our kids here, that my kids can grow up here hopefully someday, and other people recognize and want to be a part of that it's contagious. The same thing that brought me here, that brought you here, and why you've stayed, that brought you here, right? That we can just replicate that. And that is a lot of what we talked about, is the positive stuff, right? About the community. And we've used this platform to do that. Like we talked a little bit about, leadership is not always the fun stuff, the important things. I would say that 90% of the things that our community works on every day, or our community leaders work on every single day, that we would probably all, generally for Wabash County, agree on that 90%. The challenge is the 10% that ends up, because of social media, getting 90% of the attention. But that 10%, name it, renewable energy, taxes, school consolidation, whatever that is, over the last, long before our time, right? Whatever those things have been that get the most attention. What gives me peace in those moments is that when I read those things, is I know the heart of that person that made the comment, the leader that made the decision, made the comment. And again, we may be on total opposite sides of it, but And I may have handled it totally different than they have handled it, or they may look at how I've handled it and said, gosh, that was so silly. But hopefully, if they've taken the time, right, that they have trust and faith in my heart and as I do theirs in the decision that they've made, right? And so that's what excites me the most. And through all of these issues, right, it's a week doesn't go by that we get on and see a back and forth, right, locally. And I'm not, obviously, there's the federal level stuff, there's the state level stuff, but even locally, right, that people are on the different sides of something. And what gives me peace and faith through that and knowing about our community is truly the hearts of our folks.
I think that is very well said. And if everyone listening could take who needs to hear that, that's a paradigm shift in the way you approach every day. If you get downtrodden, the world feels heavy, you're upset by something you saw online that feels divisive. If you recognize intention and heart of people, it not only preserves your well-being, but keeps you from being a part of that division also, or can aid in that. So
Well
bravo.
said.
No, I mean,
It's true for you. That is truly what makes you excited. That's awesome.
yeah, it's not always popular, right? We all make decisions that aren't
No.
always popular and that people aren't
Sure.
always going to agree with. And
But
that's our job, though. That's
Yeah.
leadership, right? That's
Yeah.
we're in the positions to do that.
Christine, anything else? I've got a couple more quick questions for
No,
you. but-
that's, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Alex, what's one thing that you want listeners to know about you that doesn't necessarily come through on the microphone or in your role in the community?
Yeah. I feel fortunate to have gotten to do the work that I get to do every day so far and hopefully get to for a really long time. The other side of that, and part of what I worked hard when I was in college to try and break down a little bit, was the stereotype of playing football in college and being a quarterback at that, the stereotypes that come along with that. And worked really hard at my time at Manchester to break all those down and pour into all people, everybody, right? And hopefully our community feels comfortable enough to approach, to sit down, whether it's out to eat at the grocery store. And I get to have a lot of these conversations, right? But to feel that, tell me what's on their heart, right? Or what their thoughts are or thinking, or if they don't understand a decision, right? That they would take the time to just say, hey, would you be willing to jump on the phone and talk about this, or sit down face to face and talk about this? I hope that they realize that I genuinely, that's not, again, a tongue-in-cheek offer, right? But that they feel comfortable enough to approach and do that, because what I work hard to keep it every day is to be as genuine as I can be and be the same. It's not a facade when I show up to work and turn on the lights at the office, right? Hopefully it's the same exact thing on a Saturday night at the speakeasy as it is when I'm in the office on Monday morning, right? In terms of where my heart's at, what I believe, or the openness to have those conversations, right? So, and now I'm not saying Saturday night at the speakeasy is always the best time to have really important. Maybe we could schedule a time, but hopefully folks know that and feel that, right? I don't want people to think that like, oh, because Christine puts us on a billboard for the podcast, or because that's the community foundation. Our entire team feels that way, right? We want to have an openness that folks from the community feel like they can reach out to us, right? And our team, and you do that with your team, Christine, at Visit Wabash, and people feel that. And I want them to feel that about the community foundation. It's truly the community's foundation, right? And so our team's role in stewarding that is truly to be open and approachable to folks.
Well, before I get to my last question, I wanted to say thank you for sitting in this hot seat and allowing us to do a deep dive into what makes Alex tick and some of your past, sports accomplishments and, just some of the good that you're doing in the community. And I know how uncomfortable that can feel. You're not there trying to put the limelight on you, so I know it can be uncomfortable. But just wanted to say thank you for being vulnerable in that position, but also for doing this podcast with Christine and I. And, when we were all bouncing ideas out, how to change the narrative of Wabash County, this wasn't identified in the Imagine 185 or anything else. It was just like we each had these like little notions, and somehow we come together, and here we are, a couple years later, essentially in this room, putting together a high quality podcast that people we know are listening, and not just here in Wabash County, but all over. And
The world.
the world,
The world.
truly. And just like the donation that you received anonymously of millions of dollars, you don't know where that came from, because of the work that the Community Foundation did, I truly believe that what we're doing in this room could eventually lead to something similar. it's somebody that's coming into this community to start a new business or to relocate because they've heard and hear and sense what's going on here and how we are different and the community is different. So thank you for being a part of this and for doing all that you do in the community.
No, it's everybody. It's a team collaborative effort, right? It takes all of us. And I would make the argument, Adam, that I know people that listen to the podcast now that even if it's in the background of a high school classroom, that listening to this, whether it's Patty Grant talking about Imagine Early and they know they're an Imagine Early student and they just don't realize what went into it or the community support for it, right? Like that it's already making a difference and planting the seeds. What we talked about with this podcast is it's great if over time it can move a person here, move a business here. That's huge, right? The number one goal, I know for me and for us, right, in this podcast was just spreading stories, highlighting people to the people that live here today, right, about this community and how we pour into our people here. The exciting things, not that we don't have the negative things, right, but just a pathway to already plant those seeds so that if I'm a student in the high school classroom that's listening to that podcast in the background, I'm walking away thinking a little bit more that day, man, this community does care about me, right? Yeah. And then even if they grow up, move to college, move away, go to a big city for a while, when their perspective changes on life and they think about raising a child, what happens at a huge rate here is families saying, okay, I'm going to move back and raise my kids in that same community that I remember pouring into me. And it's not just this podcast, it's all of those things comprehensive. This is just another tool for us as a community, right, to keep planting those seeds.
That's right. And for our listeners right now, play your role in helping us spread that message. Share this with a friend, a family member, a young student, maybe somebody that you know that's in college that's thinking about, I've got 2 years left of college and what am I going to do? Do your part and share this podcast with them. Share our socials. You never know who that's going to impact and what that could do for that person and our community.
And reach out. Let us be one of those 3 people, right? Reach out and let us. I mean, we all just were trying to return the favor of the people that did it to us.
That's right.
And feel responsible.
That's right.
Every day.
And one last little housekeeping note here. I want to congratulate Christine. If you haven't tuned in to the Woodward Chronicles yet this year, Christine has been working in the background in 2025 to release another podcast called the Woodward Chronicles. Christine, would you just take like a quick 30 seconds and introduce what that podcast is about and how people can find it?
So it's just like this podcast. You can find it all on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, Podbean, etc. And it's a podcast dedicated to Mr. Ron Woodward, who was the Wabash County historian from like 1981 to early 2025. And he has written like 55 books. He's dedicated his life to preserving the history of Wabash County. And he shares stories. He's an excellent storyteller. He's great to listen to for about an hour. And so we drop a new episode every month on the first Wednesday of the month for Woodward Wednesdays. And so catch those. We have episode 2 just dropped at the beginning of 2026. And so we just encourage you to listen and subscribe for sure. It's really good.
It's really good. At the time of this recording of this podcast episode, they just released episode 2, and it was about some of the Underground Railroad that in Wabash played, some of the community members that played. But Ron does an amazing job of telling the story. And I mean, history for a lot of people can be boring.
Truth.
But he does an amazing job of like adding characters. He knows so many people's names and just a piece of
brings it to life.
He does. He brings it to life.
Yeah.
But thank you for Christine for seeing that vision and putting that together, helping preserve some of our county history and giving Ron a voice that will live forever. So, like Christine said, you can find more information on that on the Visit Wabash County website, visitwabashcounty.com/podcast. So, now my last question to Alex, kind of a rhetorical question here that I unfortunately am not going to get an answer from you tonight, but for our listeners, they're going to have to tune in to future episodes when I sit in the hot seat and then Christine sits in the hot seat. Something for you to be thinking about. If you can ask Christine or I one uncomfortable question, what would it be?
I've already been thinking as I've had to sit here for the last hour. I've been thinking through that, and I've also been thinking through: is MySpace still an active platform that I can go dig for your background from a MySpace page? That's just karma. The age, you made the age jokes to
Hey,
me. So,
listen, he still has a Yahoo account.
yeah, Hotmail.
Is it Hotmail?
No, it's Yahoo.
Yeah.
It's Yahoo. Thank you.
AOL.
Thank you both for doing this episode. Great idea. Can't wait for our listeners to learn a little bit more about Alex. And then in the future, Christine and I will both put ourselves
buckle
in
up
that
for
hot
those.
seat. As always, this podcast would not be made possible without generous donations of like people that we've talked about earlier in this show, including the Gilman Investment Fund, Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the City of Wabash, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County. Until next time, I'm Adam Stakeman.
I'm Alex Downard.
I'm Christine Floor.
And this is Thrive in Wabash County.